Hello, my name is Andy and I am the Village Idiot. I'm armed with a car and a GoPro and an unhealthy amount of time on my hands. I'm using that time to attempt to visit every civil parish in England. You're watching the Rushcliffe series. This is the southernmost district in Nottinghamshire and it contains 59 civil parishes of England. And there's some corkers down here. Let's dive in and check one out. Welcome back to Rushcliffe again, people. Now, we're used to the idea by now, aren't we, of a village transforming over time. Well, in this place, the transformation hasn't been over several centuries. It's been over the past 100 years. This place is so much different to how it would have been in 1924 to how it is today in 2024. Welcome to the parish of Newton. Here's my disclaimer for people who may be watching me for the first time. I say things as I would in my native accent and dialect. As a result, I may not pronounce things in the same way as the locals do. Remember, I'm a visitor. It's impossible to know everything. Leave me a comment, spin me a like and bash that subscribe button. Let's get to today's parish video. Newton, new farm. Hello again, Rushcliffe. This week we're taking on the other half of the former parish of Shelford and Newton. We've already discussed Shelford, so now we're going to focus on the small village that was once attached to it. Newton is a tiny hamlet, essentially located on a single road between Bingham and Radcliffe on Trent. To drive through it takes less than a minute, but that didn't stop the local miller from making a fortune from its location. In the early 20th century, Newton was often visited by people who wanted to admire the local scenery, and they were encouraged to do so by the owner of Newton Mill. A couple of decades later, the mill was gone, but Newton soon started to attract another set of people, RAF personnel. In the late 1930s, the RAF bought up a huge swathe of farmland south of the village and built an airbase. RAF Newton housed bomber aircraft flown across Europe on missions to Belgium, the Netherlands, France and Germany during World War II. It later became a training base associated with Polish airmen and the RAF police and police dogs. Now closed, RAF Newton's site is awash with brand new houses, but some of the old buildings remain, including the control tower. Oh, and be careful here, by the way, RAF Newton is supposedly a radioactive site. Let's explore why. We start with a drive through Newton Village, and when I say village I mean the oldest part of it. Newton is a tiny settlement laid out along one road between Bingham and Radcliffe on Trent and 1 mile south of East Bridgeford. Agriculture has always been at the forefront of its existence. Indeed, even today, there are a couple of farms. In one of the fields around the village can be seen the remains of a windmill. Here's a picture of what it looks like. A mill first appeared in written accounts here in 1660. It originally had 4 shuttered sails operated by springs. To increase its income during the early 20th century, the mill served teas and mineral water to cyclists and passers-by, making it popular for trips from Radcliffe, and it was a regular venue for Sunday school outings. By the 1920s though, Newton Mill had ceased production owing to unreliable wind power. Although now dismantled, some parts of it are held by the London Science Museum. Until the middle of the 20th century, Newton couldn't claim to be an expansive settlement, but it sure can now. Our main walk starts on Wellington Avenue as we tour around a housing estate south of the main street. Our first job on foot is to mark the parish off that Rushcliffe list. We're down to 22. You can also catch a bus here too. The Rushcliffe Villager calls here on its route into Nottingham. Both of these things are complemented by a massive green. So why does this housing estate exist, suddenly springing up in such a small, remote little village? Well, it's all to do with the RAF. This is all tied housing which belonged to the former RAF Newton. The base closed in 2001, but as well as the housing, some parts of it remain. On Trentshire Close, this building remains the base of 1936 Squadron Air Cadets, or Air Training Corps to give them their alternative name. The Air Cadets organisation is the UK's largest supporter of the Duke of Edinburgh award scheme. The Newton Squadron was formed in 1942 and has continually served a catchment area of some 12 miles since that date. They meet here twice a week in what used to be RAF Newton's old naffy shop. And right next to the old shop are a pair of gates. These would have marked the entrance to RAF Newton, but that's not the case anymore. Walk through the gates now and you're met with an expanse of brand new housing. This area, which is still expanding today, is called Newton Garden Village. The history of the base, though, has not been forgotten. Here, on the end of Wellington Avenue, is a memorial to RAF Newton and all those who were stationed here during its 61 active years, from 1940 until 2001. The Bronze Airman, placed here in 2023, was sculpted by Tom Nichols. So you can definitely appreciate how much Newton has changed over the past century, and it's still changing today. You can see behind me here there's some footings for some more new houses which will go up on the old airbase, and when they go up you won't be able to see what's behind them. You can see there some of the old buildings of RAF Newton. Some of that is now in industrial use. You can see there's a lorry there parked outside one of the units, so obviously that's in use as something industrial these days. Obviously the base is primarily private property. There is a bridleway that crosses it, but it's a bit awkward to get to, so this was probably the best place to see what's on the old airbase. But of course you can't see it all, and as well as the old aircraft hangars and stuff like that, the control tower, which that still stands, you know, there are some other things which we need to talk about really with the base. So here's a few pictures and a bit of history about RAF Newton when it was active. In the 1930s, with the prospect of a Second World War looming, the British Air Ministry purchased land across the UK to build brand new aerodromes, and that included an expanse of former farmland in Newton. RAF Newton was officially opened in July 1940 to accommodate two squadrons, numbers 103 and 150. The first operational aircraft to use its grass runways were ferry battles. They took part in raids bombing ports, harbours and oil storage facilities in Belgium, France and the Netherlands. Soon after, a new aircraft arrived at Newton, the Vickers Wellington. A twin-engine bomber, its mission was to concentrate on targets in Germany, including Dusseldorf, Hamburg and Berlin. From 1941 onwards, bomber aircraft and personnel were gradually moved out to other RAF stations, and Newton became a training station. In particular, Polish airmen serving with the RAF came here to train. This led to the station adopting a Polish badge as its emblem, with a Polish eagle holding a flaming torch in each talon, and with the motto Docimus et Decimus. This translates to "We teach and we learn." The training role for Newton continued after the war, and it's been varied over the years. For many years, a Bloodhound missile stood by the guardroom. Bloodhounds were used for electrical and instrument training in the 1960s. The RAF Police and RAF Police Dogs saw plenty of this place up until the mid-1990s. In comparison to other former RAF bases across the land, a lot remains at Newton. Apart from the hangars, the iconic control tower still stands too. It was unusual in that it remained substantially unchanged from World War II until its closure. It was latterly converted into offices and finally closed on the 29th of November 2000. The RAF ensign was lowered for the last time on the 27th of that month. Newton was officially closed as an RAF station on the 1st of March 2001. The grass runways have reverted back to agriculture, and most of the hangars are in industrial use. Until recently, there were some abandoned houses at Newton. These were used to film scenes from the hit 2006 film This Is England, a story centred on young skinheads in 1983, illustrating how their subculture became influenced by the far right, especially white nationalists and white supremacists. RAF Newton has also made television appearances. The hit robotic combat competition, Robot Wars, filmed part of their 6th series at Newton for the BBC, and returned again for a later series after it had transferred to Channel 5. Now lastly, I think it's worth a mention that RAF Newton is, according to the Ministry of Defence, contaminated with radium. It was used to coat the dials of aircraft and other equipment so that they could be seen in the dark. It was burned and dumped in scrap during the 1940s and 50s, and although Newton is perfectly safe now, radium remains radioactive for thousands of years. So if you see anyone walking around with 6 fingers, webbed feet, or a strange glow about them of an evening here, you now know why. I'm joking, of course. Soon, a lot of these former RAF buildings will be obscured from public view as Newton Garden Village continues to expand. Its legacy and historical importance during wartime, though, should live on for many centuries to come. Newton's continued expansion means that more and more people are moving here. The population increase was the main reason why the former parish of Shelford and Newton was split into 2 a few years ago. Newton can now literally fly solo. And speaking of flying, some of these streets are named after former aircraft. This street, for example, is named after the fairy Firefly. Another example is Dakota Road, named after the Douglas Dakota. Others include Vampire, Hamden, Vulcan, Tiger Moth and Bulldog, to name but a few. Running along the eastern edge of it all is a huge park, purposely left for recreation, but even this has some hidden RAF secrets. This is a former pillbox which can be accessed from the path through the park. Newton had several of these across the base. Dating back to World War II, they were usually built in strategic places near rivers, railways and road junctions. Only about a fifth still survive across the UK today, and this is one of them. Once beyond that, we pass a playground, built of course as part of the new developments. I wonder how many local children have investigated that pillbox though, or at least know the significance of it. I'd imagine the more curious ones have indeed ventured into it before now. In any event, we're now back to the tied housing, the older part of the airbase. It's all civilian now, as the days of flying from Newton are long since over. This village has changed dramatically since the days of the windmill, and people stopping to admire the view over the Trent Valley with a cup of tea in hand. It's fair to say that war does strange things to a place. Okay, just under 2 kilometres later, we are back to the car and we are around Newton, or Newton Garden Village, as it were. Not much to Newton Village itself, is there? Just a long linear stretch between Shelford and the A46. And speaking of the A46, we're heading out there now to go to the next one. With that, we're back to Main Street again as we head for the A46 and away from this really interesting village. Next week, we're off to another that's equally interesting, only this time, most of what makes it so fascinating isn't actually within the parish boundaries. Join me soon to find out why. See you later. Thanks for watching this video, folks. Don't forget to like this episode if you haven't already. It really makes a difference with YouTube. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us a share too if you've got friends who'd like it. You can find all the links to my social media accounts below, as well as my Buy Me a Coffee page where you can donate to the channel. Also, if you've enjoyed this episode, have a look at some more videos in this series. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as the Village Idiot, and I'm out.